Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, David.
Hi, David.
Hey there. Crope, I haven't heard any vast objections from my best practices working group addition proposal from you, so.
Oh, I'm all for it. I'm not. I think it's great. I'm just waiting for other people to comment. If it's just
Okay.
you and me, it's kind of boring.
Okay. If you violently opposed, I would listen to you actually anyway, but.
No, the actual training part of it, fully endorse. And we can figure out the rest.
Yeah. Who is hiding behind the OpenSSF operations goose today?
That would be me.
Oh, the me, but no face and no name.
It's way too early to put a camera on. Like, there's no way. I barely woke up.
It's like lunchtime.
Bro, did I see you rocking an OpenSSF t-shirt? Nice.
I dressed up because I have a
Nice.
special podcast tonight.
Nice.
You got dressed up. I love it.
Yeah,
Oh, David,
behind
you
me
might
at all
win.
times. Well, I don't know if I win, but at all times, I have this little guy, and I have someone else to keep him company.
Who's that?
Obviously. All righty.
Yeah, we'll give it one more minute, and then we'll get started for our standard 8:03 starting time.
Okay, excellent. So we will continue to let the goose give us direction. The mystery goose.
Can I actually change the name of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the rename button.
Oh, there we are.
I think you have to go to participants, click on participants, and there's you can go under more, and one of the options is rename.
I got it. Look at that.
Oh, look at that.
Works and everything. All right, let's share my screen here. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. So we will start off by discussing the Great Multi-Factor Distribution Project. Thank you, David. And then when Kay gets here, she's going to talk about a new working group potentially for supply chain integrity management. Oh, there's Kay now. So please go ahead and add yourself to the list of attendees. And with that, take it away, David.
Okay, I will add my name later since I can't. Well, I probably can type and talk, but let's try to avoid that. Yeah, it's actually the Great Multi-Factor Authentication Distribution Project, but we usually just call it the Great MFA Distribution Project. So basically, this is a proposed project for making free MFA tokens available, distributing them out, and possibly most importantly, helping people actually use them by giving them very clear, simple instructions for common cases, like how do I use this on GitLab? How do I use this on GitHub to commit to whatever? So if you want to follow more details, there's a draft plan. It's basically just a Google Doc of, hey, these are the things we want to do. This is how we're going to do them. For those of you who would like props, let's see. I don't know how well the camera is going to work on this, but I'm going to make a try here. So Google is actually contributing thousands of MFA tokens, and this is what they look like. They're very, very small. Okay. I have received hints that at least one other organization is willing to donate these. Um, there's all sorts of details involved in this. For example, how do we pick, the developers who we want to try to get these? How do we get them out? The current notion is start by looking at the folks identified by Harvard on the critical projects. How do we make sure that they get distributed in a way that is less likely to be a subverted token? And yeah, I see Crow smiling. The solution for that is basically Google's going to actually send them out. So the plan right now is to email, basically contact the developer, say, go to this URL, here's your code to get one, but they'll actually be contacting Google directly. Now, if you don't, it'll have a Google URL. Now, if you don't trust Google, well, then don't take Google's MFA token. Okay. Um, and the goal basically, the whole goal of this is to try to deal with the attack scenario of an attacker picks up an open source developer's password and uses that to either submit, to cause changes to the source code, or even worse, um, post something on a distribution site like PyPI or NPM or some such. Oh no. Or we could just leave a bunch in the parking lot outside. Yeah. Okay. We're all laughing and we're going to beat you over the head now. All right. Yeah, you know what? In all honesty, Dan is, I don't know if, is Dan Lawrence on the call? Dan
Yep,
left
I'm
out.
here.
Okay, Dan left out a bunch of these at the Open Source Summit at one of the things, and at least at one time that booth was unmanned. So we had a situation very close to that available. So we will beat Dan. But in all seriousness, so basically we're trying to work through a plan to work through this, but we want to just create a little project working group, something to work on this. Let's see here. Where's our John Nolte's actually been willing to help a lot. He's on the call here also. He's actually done some training related to this. There's actually 3 different working groups that this overlaps. Is this the best practices working group because the guidance on how to use these things is probably a best practices issue? Is this developer identity? Is this critical projects? Because in fact, we want to focus on the critical projects, at least to start. Is it its own initiative, which is allowed by the charter? I think there's excellent arguments for any of those. Any of those actually make sense to me. I was proposing to start with this within the best practices working group because I'm anticipating a lot of the work being just creating guidance or finding the best guidance and pointing people to it. At least to start with. If this grows, it can become its own initiative or another working group of its own. But basically, I think I'd rather just start with something existing and then we can grow it to its own thing as it matures later, if that turns out to be appropriate. I don't really care. Just let's get moving. Let's get started. We have some tokens. Let's get them out. And there's a repo that already exists for some of this stuff. Okay, so because it's under the OpenSSF, we're just not sure of where, and that's why we came up to the TAC. So suggestions, please. What did people think about this? What did people think about starting it within this best practices working group? We don't care nearly so much as let's get moving.
I'll start while people think. David already came and talked with the best practices group, and we had a lot of interest within the team. So at a bare minimum, we have a group of people that are willing to help contribute to the educational materials. And, if need be, I can help shepherd this along, but I have no real, I think all 3 of the groups Dave identified have value as potential owner, but we have a group of people from best practices that are interested in helping collaborate and craft some of these training materials and identifying, good resources.
And I will note that the OpenSSF charter actually specifically allows for projects directly under the TAC. You don't have we only have working groups right now. We can create a standalone project if we chose to do that. I'm proposing trying to go, just pick an existing working group and then we can use some of its existing, mailing lists and so on. And if it turns out to grow to kind of its own thing, then we can deal with it at that time. But I'm trying to minimize the number of additional meetings that people show up at and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me because it seems like a pretty short-term thing once we get it up and going. I do want to add, though, that we do still have a ton of bulk ones to just kind of hand out to people, which is kind of scary. There are ways to prove the authenticity of these, and it'd be awesome to try to get that in the guidance somehow so that we don't have to waste all of those that aren't going to be directly shipped to people.
I think that's great. Yeah. So but see, that's why we want to quickly stand up officially something, and then we can collect I actually didn't know that there was a way to authenticate these. I just grabbed these from the Mr. collection that Dan was sending out. So
Yeah. Yeah, there are ways to do it. You have to plug it into a device first, which is a little bit scary. So maybe we could have a shared laptop there, something that people can verify it on before they take it and plug it into their own. I'm just kind of making things up as we go.
Right. But I think that's basically the point, is that this group needs to work out, identify, document all this stuff so that, someone who's interested, hey, you should use an MFA token. We've worked out all the details for you. Here we go. Okay. And obviously this doesn't eliminate all problems. If you're a malicious developer and you have a token, then we know for sure it's from you malicious developer. But this at least deals with some of the problems, and that's kind of the point.
So the next week, SIG Store have a booth at KubeCon, okay, and they're going to be giving some out as well, okay, and so various people in the community are going to be helping out on the booth, and the idea is somebody signs something with SIG Store, and they get a sticker and a key, and I'm just thinking if it's useful to you, you could use this as a lessons learned, what worked, what went down really bad, what was great, that sort of thing. We could invite somebody from that community to come in and share experience with whichever working group takes this on. It might be useful.
Mm-hmm.
See how much you get people say, oh, I'm not going to trust this. What are you trying to do? You're trying to hack me, or yeah, this is incredible. This is so useful. Thank you. And sort of.
Lessons learned are always welcome, and I think what we want to do is want to try to bring that into some sort of handy, hey, here, if you're interested, here's something simple to, here's how you do it, as simple as directive as possible because of people's limited time. And I'm actually fine with some people saying, I don't trust that. That's great. Go buy something yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe on this note, something we talked about in the kickoff discussion for this, I guess it was last week, a couple of related things. So one of them was a communications plan, so that when we're distributing this, we have like an OpenSSF blog post that is outlining what we're trying to do, where this stuff came from, et cetera, so that it doesn't feel as much like a social engineering attack. And then another part of that work, and if you take a look at the link to the GitHub issues, as I've tried to break it out into pieces, another aspect of this work is probably looking at kind of threat modeling and explaining kind of why we believe this to be secure end-to-end and under what conditions, so that we have documented that for our own purposes, so that we are not unknowingly facilitating the biggest supply chain attack of all time, but also so that we have it documented and we're able to share it with anyone that's curious around, like Dan had mentioned, attestation of authenticity of the keys or something like that. So documenting all of those pieces and figuring out, once we have a distribution plan for actually moving the hardware from the donating entity to the receiving entity, exactly what that looks like from a security perspective as well.
So chain attack. So I've added those two major topics right now onto the Great MFA distribution plan as at least topics that need to be dealt with. But I think right now the issue here is that we need to form a little group that works all these, and then we can work all these. So I have a proposal. I don't really care nearly as much about exactly where things go, just that we agree that this is actually something we're going to do and a place at least to start.
So David, do you have our folks, I know you said are amenable in the best practices group to helping, are people signed up? Do we have this little group going already? Is it in progress?
Yes, we already have a little group, but I want to put it in a home somewhere.
Are there any opposition to from folks on the TAC to having this be in the best practices group?
Sounds good to me. Yeah. It's all about developer outreach, isn't it? So.
Yep, I agree. So I'd say, David, take it away.
Okay. Okay, and I know that John Nolte is the expectation is going to be involved, and as many other people as we can wrangle into into working on this. Since this is Krobe's working group, Krobe, the target is painted on you.
It's our working group, community's working group. I just help herd the cats. Yeah, no, I think that's great. I'm glad to help keep things on point and report back to the TAC and whatever, get this thing rolling. I'm really excited about it.
Yep. It's always nice in a mostly software world. It's always nice to have actual props you can show too. and we are and just be clear, these little things that we're currently planning to give away, this is not the be all and end all. For example, you'll notice there's no button on these. These are the less expensive tokens. I'm a fan actually of the ones that have buttons. I have one that does. The goal right now is to just get people moving off password alone. That's really what we're trying to do. And this is one of many tools in the toolbox to help people get there. That's it for me.
Very cool. Thank you.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Okay, the next agenda topic is the supply chain integrity management working group, potentially new working group from Kay.
Okay.
Are you there? Yep.
Yeah. Hey, folks. So there's a bunch of work going on projects that are supply chain integrity oriented. And so there's a project that Microsoft initiated that's currently on the Microsoft GitHub that we would like to propose move into OpenSSF. And there's also some work that the project is called Skim. I've mentioned it, I think, in previous meetings, SCIM for supply chain integrity management. And there's some work that we're planning between that project and the SALSA project, where between the two projects, we want to have a common data format for supply chain metadata. And so we talked with some, not with the overall SALSA group, but with some of the leaders of the SALSA project. And they were suggesting that we look at this having this common data format be something that's a new project inside of the OpenSSF. And so then we were thinking, all right, we want to move or start these things inside of the OpenSSF. Do they come as individual projects? Do we want them to be affiliated with a working group? If so, which working group would it be? And SALSA is currently in the digital identity attestation working group. One of the things, and again, this is just a few of us who were talking, but want to get what the board, what the TAC thinks here. We were thinking one option is maybe we rename the digital identity attestation working group to supply chain integrity. That gives a little broader scope, and then we keep the the projects that are there, in particular SALSA, and then start to add some additional projects to that. The name supply chain integrity management could be, we could shorten that. It could just be the supply chain working group or the supply chain integrity working group. Open to thoughts for that.
Yeah, I like the idea of both of those projects kind of living together under the same working group, given how closely related they are. And I know we've been talking a lot about other supply chain projects, integrity, and others that could fall under that. It'd be nice to have kind of an umbrella working group. Curious what other folks think about that. And Dan, I think you were are the lead of the identity attestation working group, right? Do you have thoughts on this rename and repurposing?
Yeah, I don't really care about renaming. That's fine. Yeah, has this? You mentioned you talked about it with some people from SALSA. There, like, have you presented this in the community meeting or anything, just to see what kind of overlap there is between the two, and if just to make sure we're not completely duplicating stuff. I don't know exactly who's in the conversations. There is like a group of people like helping to steer this SALSA project.
Yeah, the particular meeting that this came up in is we had a sync between Microsoft and Google on Skim and SALSA. And the purpose of that meeting was to look at both of those projects and how they align and how we can cooperate. So the people in that meeting were all Microsoft and Google people, and it hasn't been something that's been discussed with the broader SALSA working group yet, I don't believe.
So yeah, I'd say it should be a community, not a private discussion. So it makes sense to perhaps take this to the SALSA community meeting.
I don't think it's really a SALSA question. I think because what we're talking about now is just what is the working group inside of the OpenSSF. So do we rename the digital identity attestation working group? It wouldn't change SALSA at all. SALSA would still be part of an OpenSSF working group. And the second question, which is the shared data format between both, that is more of a question for the SALSA working group.
Sorry, Craig, I can see your hand up.
My opinion is we have kind of precedent for this. In the developer best practices working group, we actually have a federation of 5 loosely aligned little sub-projects that are all working towards that goal of educating and empowering developers. So my opinion is, I think renaming the digital identity attestation group is great, because I think supply chain is more resonant, and you have an affiliation, not necessarily, they're not consuming, the projects aren't consuming each other or replacing, but it gives you, this is a topic, and this is kind of a shared interest to the community and the ecosystem. So I think it's important for the foundation to consider this as a priority topic, and I would endorse that course if Dan and the group is amenable to that.
Yeah, I think just to be clear, I'm kind of teasing apart the two things. Renaming is great. I think we should go ahead and do that. But then kind of introducing the other projects and data formats that kind of are between the two. I think we should probably present that work and what those data formats are and all that stuff publicly in the SALSA meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. I think that there's value in presenting this to SALSA, like, so that they're aware of what's happening. We need to let them know that the name is changing. There's this other group. Make sure you guys talk to each other, right? Coordinate, all those good things. So yeah, it's not really a permission thing like you're saying, Kay, but a heads up is definitely a good thing for the community. And then Dan, are there still meetings happening for the digital identity attestation, or have those kind of dropped off?
Yeah, they're still happening. I think we're probably going to end up canceling next week's though, just because it overlaps with KubeCon where most people are going to be at, but we can do a quick poll. But yeah, they're still Wednesdays at 11 o'clock my time, so 9 a.m. But yeah, that's the keynotes for KubeCon, so probably skip that one.
Okay, so maybe at the next one then, Kay, we
Yeah.
do a presentation, just an introduction. By the way, we're renaming this group. Also, here's this other this new project that's going to come under it that coordinates with salsa, and then that way everybody's aware of what's happening.
So what would you say is the differentiator to salsa then? I'm trying to understand what this does that salsa doesn't do. If you're talking about common data formats that you share and
Yeah, so the Skim project is it's about supply chain integrity end to end. So and for Skim, there's a goal to identify data formats that are used in common for people who create artifacts in a supply chain. And then also the kind of the bigger part of Skim really is a data store for storing supply chain data. There's two parts to the store. There's a ledger. And so actually there's some overlap here between the Skim proposal and the SIG Store proposal.
Yeah.
So, those are things that we need to work out between both of those. But anyway, so Skim has a transparency ledger, and then also we'll have an API for querying and accessing supply chain data.
so wouldn't it make sense to contribute to the existing communities? Because I mean, they already have really large communities that are mobilized and working on to address these problems. It seems to me like we're duplicating what already exists in the community.
Yeah, so I think that's a different topic. So we do need to look at we do need to look at how Skim and SIG Store, what the overlap is between those. But that's a separate topic. I mean, there is already a community Skim that's working on this, and there's an implementation. It is a different implementation than the SIG Store implementation. So we'll need to rationalize those things, but I think it's that's a separate question from creating a working group and starting to pull related projects into that.
Wait, sorry, are we creating a new working group or renaming the existing one?
Sorry, renaming.
Yeah, so this will be a project like salsa underneath the newly renamed working group.
Yeah, so step one is rename the working group, and then step two is start additional projects or bring in existing projects from outside of OpenSSF into OpenSSF in this working group.
Yeah, so I think step two there is, I think, what Luke was getting at for rationalization and understanding and documenting the justification for the differences between the projects and making sure that we don't have multiple competing versions of the same thing in the same working group.
Yeah, I mean, not even just the working group, but in general, right? I think it's good to try to reconcile these things. Like there is traction around SIG Store, there's traction around salsa. I think there's value in this other project as well. But let's try to figure out how to best integrate them all together, right? So that we have a nice cohesive solution rather than even more disparate tools that, right, that are out there all trying to solve various pieces of the same problem. So.
Yeah, quick clarification, SIG Store is not actually part of OpenSSF, but making it clear how SIG Store relates to these other activities is still a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, I may actually, Brian's on the call here. I may actually try to do something of trying to figure out and rationalize how these different parts work together in my copious free time. So if others have ideas on that, I'd love to hear them.
I know Ava Black has also been working on that, and she'd probably love to share her work and collaborate on that. The main difference, just for to quickly describe, the main difference between SIG Store and Skim is that Skim is intended to be a very general supply chain solution. So it's for any type of metadata about artifacts in a supply chain, where the artifacts might be software, they might be cloud services, they might be hardware devices, IoT, or even surface devices or components that go into hardware or into data centers. And this is something that we're within Microsoft. There's a big drive to having this very standard way of managing supply chain information, and so very standard, very general. SIG Store right now, the focus is on signing code. Maybe the SIG Store project wants to extend and become more general, and in that case, then we would figure out how the two of those fit together. But right now there's a broader focus in the Skim project.
So again, I know SIG Store's not an OpenSSF project, but it doesn't sign code. It signs artifacts, SBOMs. It's got quite a wide coverage. There's multiple communities are adopting SIG Store. So Python Foundation, the Rust community are looking at it. So it's not just about we don't actually sign code as such, we sign artifacts, just to clarify.
Great, thanks, Luke.
Yeah, so it sounds like we definitely want to sync those up and make sure we can reconcile the, the compatibility and differences there. So cool. Any other comments on that? All right. Well, I just had one other thing that I want to talk about today. I wanted to just kind of give a update and review of the vote that we had for the Project Alpha Omega. I know there's a lot of comments on that, and all very good commentary that came out of that. So just to clarify, so we did have, I believe, 4 approved votes. So that did go ahead and is moving towards the governing board that will discuss budget. So just as kind of a refresh, we did talk with some folks at the Linux Foundation to kind of clarify various things, but like our role as a TAC is not to determine budget. It's really just to determine whether this project or working group falls in line with the technical vision that we have in place. And if we think that everything's in alignment, then we say, yep, it looks good. And then we put the burden of money onto the poor souls on the governing board. Right? So we don't have to actually deal with that. And then as far as, administration of the project, if we agree that it's something that needs to move forward and make it official, that's great. We can certainly provide input. I know there was some comments around how to kind of oversee the project that was all very useful. And then we definitely should provide that feedback, but ultimately it's up to that group to run it. And that's our opportunity to jump into that group and provide that feedback during those meetings while it's running and do all that sort of thing. But just to clarify, for future, should this pop up again, hopefully to help streamline this process, we can just decide, does it fit within the charter of OpenSSF? Does it make sense as part of our overall technical strategy? And that's kind of the role that we have on the TAC. So any questions or concerns about either that or Project Alpha Omega in general that folks want to bring up? I know, Luke, I think you had added a comment on the GitHub issue relating to another project, but I haven't had a chance to look at that yet.
I can't recall mentioning another project, but yeah, no. So I understand about the budget. That makes sense. I think the main point that I tried to convey in the thread was three TAC members said that they felt there should be more due diligence done, or there should be like a phase 0. And that was the main point that was made, because it was suggested that 5 projects be approached, 5 critical projects, to at least gauge some level of, is there a desire for this help? Okay, we expect there is, but just to get some communities on record. But that obviously didn't happen. I mean, there was a Twitter thread, and I think somebody that maintains a Python module, but there was no OpenSSLs or Kubernetes or any of the big critical projects. So that was my main point really, was technically it appears to be a good idea. I'm a bit old school here. I like to sort of find out if there's actually a problem before I push up a solution, if you see what I mean. It's just due diligence, really. Excuse me, tongue got tied there. Due diligence. So that's where I'm coming from, really, is it just seemed to me, I think it was, I'm not sure if, I can't remember who else on the TAC said it, but they said, you know, it had quite a really large scope, grandeur, and without really much preemptive analysis into the problem statement.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. I think yeah, I think it was Rao that mentioned that it was a
Rao, that's it, right?
Yeah, and then and I agree as well, and I think you and myself and Dan and Jennifer also agree that having a phase 0 makes sense and due diligence. And I know Michael is committed to that, and he's not here unfortunately to defend himself, but I know he is planning on doing more due diligence. So what he put in the issue was the responses that he's received so far, and I know he's continuing to do further due diligence. But yeah, totally valid point, 100% agree with you. And to my understanding, that is happening, and I'm glad that you brought it up.
So I'm just thinking, are the new board going to get a chance to vote on this, or will it be, when will the vote happen at the GB? Will the new board be in place then?
I'm not sure if it's going to wait for the new board. Okay, were we going to move this to the current GB?
Okay, don't hear you.
Kay may have stepped away.
Yeah.
I think just from hi, I'm Jory. I'm your new program manager. Nice to see you guys.
Okay.
So I believe the goal was to do an email vote before the end of the month, so that the OpenSSF could take advantage of the member summit, which is happening the first couple of days of November, to talk about the project at that event. So targeting a vote by the governing board 10/31 was the objective, as I recall it. And if Kay rejoins, she can hopefully confirm.
Jennifer, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I know there was a desire to have this nearer term, I think related to what Jory's talking about. I don't have exact dates, but I would propose maybe as a TAC, I think there is something converging toward a consensus that we need some kind of phase 0. I understand that there is a desire from the OpenSSF and the LF perspective that we approve or make a decision on this sooner rather than later. Consequently, maybe do we want to set the conditions under which the TAC approves it? Like, could we set some criteria right here, right now, as to what phase 0 would have to include? So Luke, you had highlighted that, Michael hasn't necessarily spoken to any of the large projects to get feedback. Could we set a benchmark that we expect to be met in terms of speaking to this many projects of this specific size and this many of this other size, or some other criteria under which we feel like that phase 0 exploration of the idea has been satisfied? Because I would amplify Luke's point that I think we do need to go back to that value of being maintainers first, and we can only do that through validating that this is valuable to maintainers and that they would view it as a positive thing. But I would also say that we know that the problem of open source security remains unsolved, and that this project is flexible and generic enough that it can probably address all of those things, but it's all in our manner of approach. So I'm just wondering if we can, just for expediency, be able to set some of those criteria today as to what we would need from Michael and from whoever's delivering this project as phase 0 for us to be okay to go forward with it, and thus to maybe conditionally recommend it to the governing board under those criteria.
Yeah, I would strongly support that.
Yeah, I'm open to that as well.
Okay, so in that case, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, thanks. In that case, what do we feel those criteria should be?
So I know there's a list that Michael's working off of, which is some criticality list, right? I don't know exactly what that list looks like, but I know it's quite a large list. It's certainly more than 5. And I believe those were the projects that were identified partly by the Harvard census, and I think for some other sources as well, that have, quote, been determined to be critical. Do we want to say that if there's a certain number from that list that all meet that agree that this is something useful, that then has been, that's the standard of due diligence? Or
I think so, yes. Yeah, it would be good to actually get some solid statements from some maintainers, because the Twitter thread that Michael started, some of the feedback was quite interesting. There was somebody that, I can't remember which project, but they maintain a large project, and they were saying that what concerned them was the cognitive load that you can get as a maintainer. So as a maintainer, you're already fighting to get through many pull requests, manage a community, and then if you have the extra pressure of somebody finding security vulnerabilities and then triaging them towards you, and then sometimes they already know about these things, but it's a case of they have to refactor a load of other code to sort of make that fix. That's why I think it's important to hear from some community maintainers here, really, because those are the folks that are going to have to be an intrinsic part of managing this. They're not just going to kick back and somebody's going to do all the work. It's going to require them to dedicate time and resources as well, if you see what I mean. Just because of the nature of some of these issues are, I mean, some of the ones that we've seen in Kubernetes, they take years to really resolve because of entire architecture changes that are required. So yeah, I mean, I think if there was a group of large critical projects that said, absolutely, we really need this, then that's going to take the wind out of my sail then, because you're getting it from the horse's mouth, so to say. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good point too around the cognitive load that some of these folks will have. And I think it might vary from project to project. So defining what the quote rules of engagement could be for various projects would be helpful. Because some of them may provide feedback to say, yeah, this is all great, I want this. However, I'd really like it if you gave it to me this way, right? That's going to be more helpful. And another project might have another method that they might want to prefer. So as part of phase 0, perhaps there's some fleshing out of what that interaction model looks like.
Or do we want to just ask generically for their feedback? Do we want like a thumbs up, thumbs down, or do we want to ask specific questions of them?
So can I jump in? I apologize, it was away for a minute, but the project does have an entire 4-month phase where there's a bunch of reaching out to maintainers to understand, to answer exactly these questions. So the real question is, do you approve the project and let that project go about doing that work as they've laid out in the project? Or and this is where I would harken back to what Ryan said earlier. The role for the TAC is to say, is this aligned with the goals and the vision of OpenSSF? And then let that project move forward according to what's already laid out. There's I forget what they call it. I think at one point Mike Scavetta called it phase 1, but now he calls it like learning phase or something. And that's exactly what will be going on in that phase, is reaching out to maintainers. So I don't see according to the way that we break out what the responsibility of is the TAC. I don't think there's a reason to block that project until something that they're already planning to do is accomplished. I hope that made some sense.
Yeah.
The
So
plan
I
here
would
is
be,
not Go ahead. Luke.
Sorry, no, you go ahead. Was that Ryan?
Yeah. I was just going to say that I don't believe, and please correct me, Luke, especially if I'm wrong here, but I don't believe the plan here is to block this per se, such as
No.
to actually just, I think the TAC feels more comfortable by establishing the guidelines in which we interact, because there's kind of a gray area, I think, when it comes to what is in alignment with OpenSSF, given that we're dealing with open source and it is a community thing. We can say, yes, this project does align technically, but we do also have a little bit of, skin in the game as far as how we interact with the community. And I think that's where this is coming from. And we just want to make sure that it's clearly defined that, yeah, I know that Michael has this plan in here to do this initial reaching out phase. And I think what the other TAC reps are asking for is more of just give a very clean definition of what that phase looks like. I think that's what we're after.
Yeah,
so maybe a way for me to think about it is that the TAC wants, and I think this is totally makes sense, is the TAC wants to provide more comments and more structure into that initiation phase, and I'm sure Michael would be open to that. It's just changing, maybe the TAC wants to further structure the order in which things are done. Something like that would make a ton of sense.
If we wanted to take a look at what Michael has right now, I've pasted it into the OpenSSF TAC meeting notes under Alpha Omega. He specified what the preparation phase looks like for both the Alpha and the Omega piece. So I've pasted them into that document. We might want to take a look and see if there's anything we wish to add to those phases as a condition.
Yeah, I think like the one point he's got here that says establish essential criteria, concrete activities, and a basic template for alpha engagement. I think that's the part that we're wanting to provide some feedback on. So I think if folks from the TAC want to go into that document and specifically put that criteria there, that's the place to put it.
And correct me if I'm wrong. So I'd be very supportive of getting behind the 4-month due diligence phase, but as it stands, we're voting on the entirety of the whole project, the later stages as well. So perhaps we need to repurpose the document to be specific about what's being voted on.
I guess we could alternatively introduce a milestone-based approach where we approve phase 1 and the rest of it, or phase 0, or whatever we want to call it, this preparation phase, and the project proceeds conditionally upon satisfying that. And maybe what we do, if we wanted to be more in the loop, is we could introduce it that after the completion of that preparation phase, they have to bring back what they've found, presented to the TAC, and the TAC votes on whether to proceed.
I second that. That sounds.
I'd already typed something to that effect in the chat as well.
Yeah, that sounds pragmatic to me.
Any opposition to that? Rao or Dan or Phil?
That sounds like a fair approach. I'm supporting.
Yep. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Cool. I like it.
Plus one.
Perfect. All right. Unanimous. Cool. So let's do that then. We'll make that plan. I know at the next governing board meeting, I can highlight that as well, that's the approach. And I think that's actually kind of the approach already that Michael's doing. So now we'll just make it more formal. But yeah, absolutely agree with that. So I think the next step then, so if we agree that that's what we want to do, we need to get very concrete about what we think that criteria should be for phase 0. So do we want to create a separate document for that, or do it within Michael's existing document where he's kind of has a section for that already?
Probably makes sense just to repurpose it into a new document. I mean, a lot of the text doesn't have to write the whole thing again. There can be some copy and pasting in there, but to sort of outline, this is phase 0, which constitutes X, Y, Z. And then Michael can go ahead then, and it's not held back in any way. He can start talking to the community.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'll talk to Michael about creating that separate document, and then we can send that link out and folks can provide their comments and what they believe the criteria should be, and then we can kind of move forward with that. That seem like a reasonable approach for everyone?
Sounds good to me.
All right, that is what we could do. Okay, so the last thing that we have, I don't actually put it on the agenda, is this voting process, which I had absolutely zero time to work on in the past 2 weeks. I do have time this week, so I'm planning to work on that for what the TAC vote process will look like going forward. If folks have any comments to that or suggestions or ideas, please feel free to reach out. But I will have time this week, so I'm planning on working that. But,
Ryan, I'd love to help with that if you need it.
oh, that'd be awesome. Thank you, Joy. Okay, any other topics that folks want to discuss? We got 10 minutes remaining. Going once, going twice. All right, that concludes this week's meeting. All right, we'll send out those emails. Look forward to defining that criteria for phase 0, and then we'll get moving. See you guys in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
That's all.